Information overload. It's something that impacts every single one of our lives. And as a student, you're especially aware of that. We have so much information coming at us on a daily basis. By the end of week 3, you usually feel something like this, like you're buried in class notes and notes you've taken from textbooks and messages and so on and so forth. Your workspace at home begins to look something like this, ready to topple over on top of you. You just can't see out from the stack of readings that are required of you. It's like your head is going to explode. You have so much information to manage. And then, if you don't watch out, that's when depression can set in, because you've got so much to do, so much to read, and how are you going to handle it all? Well, it's no wonder that you feel overwhelmed. Do you know that in one 24-hour period, you experience more information than someone living in the Middle Ages experienced in an entire lifetime? So what we need to do is we need to get a handle on all of this information. And one of the ways we can do that is by employing active reading strategies. The first one that we're going to talk about is highlighting. Highlighting is really an essential activity for many of us. And it does have certain tips and pointers that I'd like to share with you in order for it to be a successful practice. So first of all, you have to realize that you're not expected to learn and recall every single detail and example in your textbooks. No one would imagine that that would be possible. But the tough part about being a student is that you are responsible for figuring out how much of this is an important idea, how much of it is something that is good to know, but I can let go of. So why would we want to highlight? Well, one of the reasons is it makes your study and review efficient. If you highlight effectively, you don't have to go back and reread the entire chapter or the entire reading. You can just look at your highlighting. It also can help to show what's important in terms of ideas. You also have to decide which ideas are main ideas and which ideas are details. A lot of times when I see students highlight, they always use the broad tip of their highlighter, and that's the way they highlight everything. And a more effective way to use a highlighter is to use the full brush stroke for main ideas, but then underline the details. That's why most highlighters come with a chisel tip. Highlighting also is one of those activities that keeps you physically active. As I've already mentioned to you, you should never tackle a reading with empty hands. And this time, instead of using a paper and a note and a pencil to do SQ3R notes, what you're doing is you're using a highlighter to accent what's important in that particular reading. But as I said, there are specific tips and pointers you need to follow to be an effective highlighter. And the thing to remember is that you'll be highlighting not only for this assignment, but you'll be highlighting on every single test and exam that we use, as well as additional assignments. So it's important to get the tips and pointers that I'm going to discuss in mind right now. So first of all, read first and then highlight. Now, why would you want to read first rather than highlighting on the fly right from the time you start? Well, I bet you can figure the answer out to that one. Because you've done that before, and you know that when you start highlighting as you're reading, everything looks important, and so you highlight everything, and when you get done, it's like your page is a sea of color. That doesn't save you study time. That doesn't save you time from having to reread if you've highlighted way too much. So how much should you highlight? And when should you highlight? Well, let me give you this example. I've never taken chemistry as a course. And so if I'm going to take a chemistry course, it's going to be all brand new information for me. I only have the information on chemistry that life's experiences have given me. So when I start to read a chemistry text, I'm going to read a paragraph at a time and then go back and highlight. However, if you hand me a textbook on how to deliver public speeches, not a problem. I've got a master's in that. I can probably read the entire chapter and only go back and capture the few words that I need to remember from that particular chapter. So it all depends on your background knowledge. Don't sell yourself short. You've had life experiences, you've had courses. Some things will be easier to master because you've already, done the background information in a previous year. So you determine how much you should read before you go back and highlight. But always read first and then highlight. Pay attention to headings and bolded words. I would encourage you not to highlight headings and bolded words because they're already called out to your attention by the textbook publisher. They're either in bold, or they're in color, or they're shaded, or they're called off into the margin. Textbook publishers do all kinds of different things to draw attention to certain important words. But what you should do, a la SQ3R, is to turn these headings or these important words into questions. And as you start to highlight, then what you do is you highlight the parts of the reading that answered your questions. And those are going to be main ideas or the most important supporting details. Always highlight from left to right. Think about that. Why might that be? As you've probably decided, it's because we read from left to right. As we highlight from left to right, the brain can encode and capture things to send to working memory. And that has a better chance of transferring to long-term memory for us. If you highlight in the reverse order, it's kind of nonsensical, like singing a song backwards. Just doesn't make much sense, and so the brain discards that information. When you're looking for what to highlight, main ideas or main points are a good place to start. Most often in textbooks, the topic sentence appears first, and I'm going to add second, or last in the paragraph. So check those 3 locations, and there should probably be something that you highlight there. However, as you highlight those main ideas, you're also going to probably want to support those main ideas with, some facts or statistics or examples. Here again, I would turn that highlighter to the underline mode and be very selective about how much I highlight in terms of examples or details. Again, if I highlight too much, the whole page is in color, and that doesn't help me reduce the information and be able to just go back and skim my highlighting to capture the meaning of the chapter. Another topic that we will study in depth in future weeks is looking at transition words and how they help us comprehend readings. When you're reading along and you've been studying, some of the contributing causes to a major illness, and then the text says, however, we know that there's going to be a change in direction, that these previous ideas about causes of illnesses are going to be counteracted by some new information coming up. So whenever you see transition words like however, but, in addition, you want to have your highlighter ready because you know that an important piece of information is coming along. Of all the tips and pointers, I think this one is the most important. Do not ever complete highlighting of sentences. Only highlight selective words and phrases, and those are most likely to be nouns and verbs. The person, place, or thing, and the action. If you highlight complete sentences, you really are forcing yourself to do much more reading. Take number 9 for an example. If you only highlight the words highlighting, convey, content, you've really captured the meaning of this sentence. I don't need to highlight the whole thing. I can just simply reread my highlighting and understand what that sentence was saying. The other piece in number 9 is that you shouldn't highlight things you already know. And again, that is going to depend on your background information that you already have about a subject. And so be selective. Less is more. That's very true in highlighting. So highlighting the right amount. If you highlight too little, then you really haven't done yourself any favor because you've missed a lot of valuable information. If you highlight just right, no more than 1/10 of a page, or depending on how familiar you are with the subject, up to 1/3. If you highlight too much, you can't identify the most important ideas, and so you've done yourself a disservice there because you'll have to go back and read the entire chapter again. For the purposes of our class, you should never highlight more than 10 to 20% of the material. Good percentages to remember. So, how do you check to see if you've highlighted the right amount? Well, go back through and reread just the words that you've highlighted. Does it make sense? If it does, great. If it doesn't, then go back and maybe you need to add a bit more highlighting so that what you've highlighted makes sense to you as you read it. Developing a regular and a consistent system of highlighting is very important. You have to decide ahead of time based on the subject matter. Are you only going to highlight main ideas, or are you going to highlight main ideas and details? Again, using that broad brush stroke with the underline chisel point is a good thing to do for that. Are you going to highlight and mark definitions of new terminology? I've seen some successful students who, even though the vocabulary words in their textbook are in bold-faced type, like to draw sort of a bubble around it with their highlighter, and then they go ahead and underline the definition that follows. How are you going to be able to distinguish definitions from other important information you marked and highlighted? Well, maybe definitions are underlined or they're boxed in with your highlighter. We don't have to just simply always think of highlighting as a broad brushstroke. There are lots of different symbols and ways that you can manipulate that. Whatever you do, be consistent so that when you look back through your highlighting, you'll know exactly what it means. I have seen people very successfully use one color for main points, use a different color of highlighter for details, and a third color for definitions. That works for some people. It doesn't for me. I get confused as to which colored highlighter I'm supposed to use, and I spend more time distracting myself on that than I do actually getting through the material. If it works for you, great, but don't expect it to work for everyone. I've talked about some other systems, such as using, the fine tip and the broad stroke, and using, brackets and bubbles to draw around certain key concepts or words. Develop your system and then use it all the time. Try to highlight just enough information in each passage so that it reads smoothly when you review it. Not too much, not too little. And then ask yourself, did I highlight too much, or am I right on target? Have I used a consistent system for highlighting? Does my highlighting reflect the meaning of the passage? What's important? And when I reread my highlighting, does it follow a train of thought, or does it just seem like disconnected words that don't make much sense? And that concludes this video on highlighting.